The discovery of faster-than-light travel wasn't supposed to happen like this. Most civilizations took centuries of careful research, methodical testing, and gradual advancement. Humanity did it because someone said it couldn't be done. Dr. Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Assembly's Grand Chamber, her weathered hands steady on the podium despite the weight of 10,000 alien eyes upon her. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, a vast sphere suspended in space at the heart of the Assembly's territory. Through its transparent walls, the galaxy sparkled like scattered diamonds on black velvet. "Distinguished members of the Assembly," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the universal translators, "Earth thanks you for this audience. We're honored to join the galactic community." She paused, studying the varied forms before her, crystalline beings that sparkled like living gemstones, massive gas-filled organisms that floated near the ceiling, and everything in between. A deep rumbling sound echoed through the chamber as High Counselor Vexthor, a towering arthropoid with iridescent kitten, leaned forward. "We are intrigued by your species' rapid advancement, Dr. Chen. Most civilizations take generations to achieve what you've managed in mere decades. Perhaps you could enlighten us about your methods." Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, High Counselor. Though I should warn you, the story might make some uncomfortable." She tapped her datapad, bringing up a holographic display of Earth's history. 20 years ago, the Krax Empire's long-range survey ships detected our radio signals. They sent us a message, explaining that faster-than-light travel was impossible for primitive species like ours. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Krax representatives, their scaled faces unreadable, shifted in their seats. "We thank them for their input," Sarah continued, "and then we proved them wrong. Humanity has a particular trait. Tell us something's impossible, and we'll move heaven and earth to prove otherwise." High Counselor Vexthor's antennae twitched. An admirable trait, perhaps, but one that could lead to recklessness. The Assembly has protocols, guidelines for technological advancement. "With all due respect," Sarah interrupted, causing several delegates to gasp at the breach of protocol. "Those guidelines assume that progress follows a linear path. Humans don't work that way. When we focus on something, when we truly commit ourselves to a goal, we achieve things that others might consider impossible." The Krax representative, Ambassador Zix, rose from his seat. His scales shifted from green to a deep purple, a sign of agitation. "And what happens when your species' determination conflicts with established galactic law? Will you simply ignore millennia of carefully crafted regulations because you believe you know better?" Sarah's expression hardened. "Ambassador, we've studied your laws carefully. We intend to follow them. But there's something you should understand about humanity, something vitally important." She looked around the chamber, meeting as many alien gazes as she could. "We are peaceful by choice, not by necessity. We hope to be friends, to trade, to share knowledge, but we must insist on being treated as equals." Laughter erupted from several sections of the chamber. A crystalline being chimed in with a sound like tinkling bells. "Equals. Your species has barely left its solar system. Your technology is centuries behind most Assembly members. What could you possibly offer as equals?" "Innovation," Sarah replied calmly. "Creativity. And most importantly, a warning." The chamber grew quiet at her tone. "Humanity has spent its entire history fighting itself. We've become very, very good at it. We don't want to fight anyone else, but if forced." She let the implication hang in the air. High Counselor Vexthor's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Dr. Chen, while we appreciate your colorful statement, perhaps we should move on to more practical matters. Your application for Assembly membership includes several trade proposals." "Of course," Sarah nodded, but her eyes remained serious. "Though I hope you'll remember my warning. Humanity would much rather trade than fight. We'd rather build than destroy. But if pushed," she smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes, though not in a way that comforted anyone watching. Well, let's just say we're very motivated when someone tells us we can't do something. In the observer's gallery, a Nexian historian named Klivak made careful notes. Unlike the others, he didn't dismiss Dr. Chen's warning. He had studied enough emerging civilizations to recognize something different about these humans. They didn't move like a species that had just achieved FTL travel. They moved like predators pretending to be prey. As the session concluded and the various representatives filed out, Klivak watched Dr. Chen speaking quietly with her staff. He noticed how they positioned themselves, always aware of their surroundings, always maintaining clear lines of sight to all exits. These weren't the behaviors of a primitive species awed by their first contact with galactic civilization. These were the behaviors of warriors trying very hard to look peaceful. The next few months would prove him right, though not in any way the assembly could have predicted. Human ships began appearing throughout assembly space, always following proper protocols, always polite, but moving with a purpose that made many uncomfortable. They established trading posts, research stations, and diplomatic missions with remarkable speed. Most disturbing to some observers was how quickly humans adapted to alien technologies. Within weeks of being introduced to new concepts, they would produce their own versions, sometimes with improvements that shouldn't have been possible for such a primitive species. The Krax Empire watched these developments with growing concern. Their previous message to Earth had been intended to discourage human advancement, to keep the species safely contained until they could be properly managed. Instead, they had apparently created exactly what they had hoped to prevent: a highly motivated, rapidly advancing human civilization with something to prove. In his private chambers, High Counselor Vexthor reviewed Klivak's preliminary report on human history. The more he read, the more his antennae twitched in agitation. These humans hadn't developed their technology gradually. They had done it in massive leaps, often in response to conflicts among themselves. Their greatest advances came not from careful research but from desperate necessity. The report ended with a simple warning. Any species that can turn their own inner conflicts into a force for advancement is not to be underestimated. The humans' warning should be taken seriously, not because they are threatening us, but because they are trying to prevent what they know they're capable of. Unfortunately for the galaxy, not everyone would heed this advice. The Krax Empire, in particular, was about to make a very serious mistake. One that would teach the entire assembly exactly why humans kept politely asking not to be angered. They were about to learn that please wasn't a request. It was a final warning. The first sign that something was wrong came not from diplomatic channels or military movements, but from the shipping manifests. Klivak, still monitoring human activities, noticed the pattern 6 months after Earth joined the assembly. Human merchant vessels were changing their routes, avoiding Krax space entirely. More interesting was what they were shipping. "Look at these numbers," he told his research assistant, projecting a holographic chart. "Human mining operations have tripled, but their exports of refined materials have barely increased. They're stockpiling resources." The assistant, a young Nexian named Frill, waved a tentacle dismissively. "The Krax trade restrictions are forcing them to be self-sufficient. It's hardly surprising." "That's not what concerns me," Klivak responded, bringing up another display. "Look at their colony ships. The newer ones have triple-layered hulls and military-grade shields. Who builds civilian vessels like that?" Before Vril could respond, their screens lit up with breaking news. The Krax Empire had announced new tariffs on all human goods, claiming Earth was undercutting standard market prices. More significantly, they demanded inspections of all human vessels passing through their territory. In the assembly chamber, Dr. Chen stood calmly as Ambassador Zix delivered his demands. Her hair had more gray now, but her eyes held the same steady determination. "The Krax Empire's concerns about human trading practices are noted," she said quietly. "However, we cannot accept random inspections of our vessels. Please reconsider this course of action." Zix's scales rippled with amusement. "Still using the same tired warnings, Dr. Chen. Your species has been in space for barely a year. You're in no position to make demands. We're not making demands, Chen replied. We're making a request. Please don't force our hand. The Crax Empire's response was swift. Within days, their patrol ships began stopping human vessels near their borders. They expected protests, maybe even some minor skirmishes. Instead, human ships simply disappeared from Crax space entirely. Trade slowed but didn't stop. It just found new routes. More surprisingly, Earth's various political factions, which had often argued in assembly meetings, suddenly presented a unified front. Klovac noticed other changes too. Human ships vanished from popular social spots in space stations. Their crews became quieter, more focused. And strangest of all, their mining ships kept working harder than ever, but now they operated with their transponders off. I don't like this, he told High Counselor Vexthor during an emergency meeting. I've been studying human history. Did you know they're the only known species that developed nuclear weapons, used them in war, and then chose not to use them again? Vexthor's antennae twitched irritably. What does that matter now? It matters, Klovac insisted, because it shows they understand something none of our species learned naturally. The full cost of total war. And that makes them very dangerous. The Crax Empire didn't see it that way. When their trade restrictions failed to get the response they wanted, they decided to make an example. They seized a small human colony ship, claiming it was carrying contraband. The response was immediate, and unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Every human ship in space activated their emergency beacons at once, broadcasting the same message: you were warned. Please don't make us take action. Then, for the first time since joining the Galactic community, Earth went completely silent. No communications, no broadcasts, no ship movements. Nothing. The Crax celebrated, thinking they had scared humans into submission. But Klovac knew better. He had seen something like this in human historical records. They called it the calm before the storm. In his study, surrounded by documents about human warfare, Klovac began writing an urgent message to the Council. He had finally understood what Chen's warnings really meant. He only hoped someone would listen before it was too late. For exactly 72 hours, Earth and all human colonies maintained complete silence. No ships moved, no messages sent, nothing. Klovac couldn't sleep, his perfect memory showing him patterns he didn't want to see. The great wars of human history, their rapid technological advancement during conflicts, their ability to unite against external threats, it all pointed to something the galaxy had never seen before. His research revealed something else that terrified him. The humans weren't just preparing for a fight. They had been preparing for this specific fight since the day they joined the assembly. Every trade route, every diplomatic mission, every scientific exchange had served two purposes. They were exactly what they appeared to be, and they were reconnaissance. As the 72nd hour approached, Klovac finished his report to the Council. Its title was simple: Why Humans Are Different. The first line read, humans are the only known species that has spent their entire history fighting themselves. They didn't develop weapons to fight aliens. They developed weapons to fight each other. And now, he didn't need to finish the sentence. The galaxy was about to learn exactly what humans could do when they were truly angry. And this was just the beginning. The first attack came from nowhere. Hidden shipyards, concealed within hollowed-out asteroids and shielded from all known detection methods, opened their doors. The true purpose of all those mining ships became clear as hundreds of warships emerged from hiding places scattered across human space. But it wasn't just the ships that shocked the galaxy. It was how they moved. Human vessels attacked in ways no one had seen before, using tactics that made no sense until it was too late. Admiral Sarah Martinez, commanding the Earth Defense Fleet from her flagship Terran Dawn, watched the first reports come in with grim satisfaction. 5 years, she murmured, studying the tactical displays. 5 years of preparation. 5 years of studying how they fight. 5 years of learning their weaknesses. and they thought we were just being paranoid. In the council chamber, chaos erupted as reports arrived. Human ships weren't just fighting. They were winning. They knew exactly where to hit, exactly how to strike. It was like they had practiced this 1,000 times. The Crax Empire's confidence crumbled as defeat after defeat rolled in. But they're just one species, Ambassador Zix stammered. How can they fight like this? Flovak, who had been summoned to explain what was happening, projected a historical document. Humans call it combined arms warfare. They don't just use ships. They use everything. Look at their attack patterns. The tactical display showed human forces split into small groups of 3 or 4 ships. The Crax had expected them to attack in large fleets like every other species did. Instead, these tiny groups struck everywhere at once, hitting supply lines, communication relays, and fuel stations. It's called asymmetric warfare, Klovak explained, his voice shaking. Humans perfected it fighting themselves. They don't try to match their enemy's strength. They attack where the enemy is weak. But how do they coordinate such small groups? High Counselor Vexthor demanded. They don't. Not completely. Each group has a mission, but they make their own decisions about how to complete it. Humans call it initiative. Their soldiers are trained to think for themselves. The Crax's large fleets found themselves chasing shadows. Every time they gathered enough ships to crush a human force, that force would vanish, only to appear somewhere else entirely. And while the Crax wasted fuel and time hunting these small groups, human engineering teams were busy with something else. They were building bases everywhere. Look at this, Klovak said, pointing to a new report. They're not just fighting. They're setting up repair stations, fuel depots, and supply lines as they go. They're not fighting a battle. They're fighting a war. The difference became clearer each day. Crax ships had to return to their home bases for repairs and supplies. Human ships could repair and resupply at hundreds of small bases scattered across space, bases that hadn't existed a week ago. Admiral Martinez received a message from Earth Command. The Crax still refused to back down, it read. They've asked their allies for help. Martinez nodded. Just as we expected. Begin Phase 3. Across human space, something new appeared. Small, fast ships loaded with electronic warfare equipment. The humans called them web weavers. They didn't attack with weapons. They attacked with information. Crax communication networks began to fail. Their targeting systems showed phantom ships. Their navigation computers gave wrong directions. And through it all, human ships kept striking, kept vanishing, kept appearing where they weren't expected. How do we stop them? The Crax leadership finally asked. Klovak's answer chilled the room. In all of human history, there's only one sure way to stop them. Give them what they wanted in the first place. Peace and fairness. Because if you don't, they'll keep fighting, and they'll keep getting better at it. The real shock came when intelligence reports revealed something terrifying. Humans were still holding back. They had weapons they hadn't used, tactics they hadn't shown, technologies they had kept hidden. All this destruction, all this defeat, Klovak whispered, reviewing the latest data, and they're still holding back. The galaxy was learning why humans had begged them not to make them angry. But the real question remained. Would the Crax surrender before humanity decided to stop holding back? Because if they didn't, the storm that was coming would make this look like a gentle rain. The Crax Empire's last stronghold was their home system, protected by their largest fleet. 3,000 ships formed a defensive wall around their capital planet. It should have been impossible to break through. Should have been. Admiral Martinez stood on her bridge, looking at the tactical display. Launch Operation History Lesson, she ordered. Across human space, every warship jumped into faster-than-light travel at exactly the same moment. The Crax tracked them, expecting an attack on their fleet. But the human ships didn't head for the fleet. They didn't even head for the capital. They're attacking empty space. The Crax military commander shouted. watching the tactical displays. They'd gone mad. Klovac knew better. He burst into the council chamber, waving data sheets. "It's not empty space," he yelled. "Look at the pattern. Look where they're gathering." The human ships had formed a massive sphere around cracked space, each ship exactly the same distance from its neighbors, creating a perfect grid in 3 dimensions. Then every human ship activated a new device at the same time. The Crack's fleet's sensors went dark. Their communications died. Their navigation systems failed. Even their life support systems started giving false readings. "It's a sphere of electromagnetic interference," Klovac explained, his voice filled with awe. "They're not attacking the fleet. They're attacking everything electronic in cracked space at once." Small human ships slipped through gaps in the confused Crack's fleet. They carried no weapons. Instead, they broadcast a simple message directly to the citizens of Crack's worlds. "Your leaders started this war. They can end it. Ask them why they're letting you suffer." The Crack's carefully controlled media network couldn't block the message. Their citizens, already angry about the collapsed economy and constant defeats, began to protest. Dr. Chen, now serving as Earth's wartime ambassador, addressed the assembly. "We could have disrupted their farming systems," she said quietly. "We could have cut off their food supply. We could have bombed their cities. We didn't, because we're not trying to destroy the Crack's empire. We're trying to save it from its own leaders." The protests grew larger. Crack citizens demanded answers. Why had their leaders ignored the human warnings? Why had they started a war they couldn't win? Why were they still fighting? In orbit around the Crack's capital, the mighty defense fleet was falling apart. Without working electronics, most ships could barely move. Some crews abandoned their vessels. Others surrendered. A few tried to fight back, but they couldn't even find their targets. Admiral Martinez received a message from Earth Command. "Offer them one last chance." She opened a channel to the Crack's capital. Despite all their electronic warfare, this signal got through perfectly clear. "Your fleet is blind. Your economy is ruined. Your people want peace. And we still haven't used our actual weapons yet. Surrender now, or find out what happens when humans stop being nice." The Crack's leadership finally understood. With shaking hands, they transmitted their unconditional surrender. The humans had won without destroying the single Crack's world, without causing a single civilian death, without even using their most powerful weapons. They had won by making their enemies defeat themselves. But what happened next shocked the galaxy even more than the human victory. Instead of occupying Crack's worlds or demanding reparations, humans began helping rebuild what they had disrupted. "Earth offers the following peace terms," Dr. Chen announced to the assembly. "First, all Crack's worlds will receive aid to rebuild their economies. Second, we will help repair their damaged infrastructure. Third, we will share defensive technology so this never happens again." The council chamber erupted in confused whispers. But you won," the former Crack's ambassador stammered. "You could take everything from us." Chen's face remained serious. "Taking everything from you would make you angry. And if there's one thing humans understand, it's how dangerous angry people can be." Admiral Martinez directed the reconstruction efforts herself. Human ships that had once formed a barrier of electronic warfare now delivered supplies. Engineering teams that had built secret bases now helped repair damaged stations. "I don't understand," High Counselor Vexthor said to Klovac as they watched the rebuilding. "Why are they helping their enemies?" Klovac showed him a historical document. After humans fought their Second World War, the winners helped rebuild their enemies' lands. Those enemies became their strongest allies. 1 year after the surrender, the Crack's worlds had recovered. Their economy was stronger than before. Their technology was more advanced. And most importantly, they had become Earth's closest allies in the assembly. In the rebuilt Crack's capital, citizens watched in amazement as human medical teams treated their sick, human engineers fixed their systems, and human teachers shared their knowledge. "We could have destroyed everything," Dr. Chen explained to the assembly. We could have taken your worlds, stolen your resources, enslaved your people. But that would have meant fighting again in 10 years or 50. We would rather turn enemies into friends. Klovac's final report on human warfare became required reading for all assembly diplomats. Its conclusion was simple. Humans are the deadliest species we have ever encountered, not because they are the strongest or most advanced, but because they understand something no other species does. The true purpose of war is peace. In her last act as Fleet Admiral before retirement, Martinez commissioned a memorial on Earth, not to celebrate victory, but to remember the cost of conflict. The inscription read, "We fight because we must. We win because we can. We show mercy because we should." The assembly underwent profound changes. Species that had once looked down on humans now sought their counsel, not out of fear, but out of respect for their unique perspective. Human diplomatic academies began teaching alien diplomats about conflict resolution, while alien universities studied human history to understand how adversity had forged such a remarkable species. Dr. Chen gave her final speech before retiring from diplomatic service. "We warned you not to make us mad," she said, "not because we wanted to threaten you, but because we didn't want to show you what we could do. Humans don't like fighting. We're actually quite peaceful. But when we must fight, we fight to end all fights." She looked around the chamber, meeting each delegate's eyes. "Remember this lesson. Humans will always offer friendship first. We will always try peace before war. We will always warn you before we fight. But if you ignore our warnings, if you mistake kindness for weakness, you will learn why our ancestors called war hell." The Cracks, once proud conquerors, became advocates for peace. Their ambassador, speaking to a group of young diplomats, shared what his people had learned. "We thought humans were weak because they kept asking nicely. We didn't understand that every pleas was a gift, a chance to avoid conflict with a species that had mastered the art of war by fighting itself for millennia." Klovac's final addition to the Galactic Archives became the most read document in Council history. It was titled Understanding Humans, A Guide to Peace. Its opening line read, "When a human says, 'please,' they are not begging. They are giving you a chance to avoid learning why they have survived everything their harsh world could throw at them. Listen to them. Learn from them. But most importantly, never, ever make them mad." The galaxy had learned its lesson. In the centuries that followed, whenever a species considered attacking humans, older races would tell them a simple story. The story of how the universe learned too late why humans kept saying, "Please don't make us mad." Because sometimes the most important warnings come in the form of polite requests. On Earth, in the newly established Galactic Peace Center, a simple plaque hung above the entrance. It showed two hands, one human, one alien, clasped in friendship. Below it, written in every known language of the galaxy, was humanity's new motto: "We come in peace. Please let us keep it that way." The end.